The barren planet stretched endlessly in every direction, a lifeless wasteland of gray rocks and swirling dust storms. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow as he adjusted the scanner strapped to his wrist. He had been exploring uncharted territories for months now, searching for salvageable tech or resources. Yet today felt different. There was something eerie in the silence, something that made the hair on his neck stand up. The scanner beeped softly, signaling an anomaly just a few meters ahead. Marcus crouched low, his hand instinctively reaching for the small blaster holstered at his side. As he approached, the source of the signal became clear: a crash site. A small alien pod lay wedged between two jagged rocks, its once polished surface now scorched and cracked. He stepped closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. The pod's hatch was partially open, revealing a dim, flickering light inside. Marcus leaned in, his voice calm but firm. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" A soft whimper answered him, barely audible over the wind. Marcus froze. Slowly, a small figure emerged from the shadows inside the pod. A girl no taller than his knee. Her skin was pale blue, almost translucent, and her white hair cascaded down her back in soft waves. Her wide violet eyes were filled with terror as she stared at him, clutching the sharp metal shard like a weapon. Marcus raised his hands in a show of peace. "Easy there. I'm not here to hurt you." The girl didn't relax. Instead, she shrank back further into the pod, trembling. Marcus noticed the way her small frame shook with every breath, as though she was barely holding herself together. Her gaze darted from his face to the blaster at his hip, and she whispered something in a language he didn't understand. The universal translator on his wrist struggled to keep up but managed to piece together her words. "Stay back, human. Eater." Marcus blinked, confused. "Eater? What are you talking about?" The girl didn't respond. Instead, she pressed herself against the pod's wall, clearly expecting him to attack. Marcus took a careful step back and sat down on a nearby rock, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Look, I don't know what you've been told, but I'm not going to eat you. I just want to help." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. Marcus sighed and pulled a small ration pack from his backpack. He tore it open and took a bite, chewing exaggeratedly before holding it out toward her. "See, food. For you, not people." The girl hesitated, her violet eyes flicking between the ration pack and Marcus's face. Hunger won out over fear. She darted forward, snatched the pack from his hand, and retreated back into the pod. Marcus watched as she tore into the food with a ferocity that spoke of days without eating. "Guess you've had a rough time," he muttered, more to himself than to her. As she ate, Marcus noticed the state of her pod. The controls were fried, and the exterior was riddled with dents and scorch marks. Whoever this girl was, she had barely survived whatever had brought her here. He leaned closer to inspect the damage, but the girl hissed at him, brandishing her metal shard again. Okay, Marcus said, holding his hands up. "You don't trust me yet. That's fair." The girl's glare softened just a little, though she still didn't lower her weapon. Marcus leaned back against the rock and gazed at the empty horizon. "You know what," he said, his voice soft. "You're not the only one who's scared. This place gives me the creeps too." The girl didn't respond, but she watched him more closely now, as if weighing his words. For the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of something other than fear in her eyes: curiosity. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The small girl's violet eyes glinted under the dim light inside the pod as she finished the last crumbs of the ration pack. Her grip on the jagged metal shard loosened slightly, but she still didn't let her guard down. Marcus stayed seated on the rock outside, careful not to make any sudden moves. He had encountered plenty of strange situations in his travels, but this one was different. She wasn't a threat, just scared and out of her depth. "So," Marcus said, breaking the silence, "you got a name, or should I keep calling you Tiny Terror in my head?" The girl tilted her head, clearly not understanding. Marcus tapped the translator on his wrist. It buzzed and beeped, repeating his words in her language. Her eyebrows furrowed, and after a long pause, she mumbled something. Vea. The translator echoed in a mechanical tone. Vea, Marcus repeated with a nod. Nice to meet you, Vea. I'm Marcus. She didn't reply but didn't retreat further either, which Marcus took as a small win. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Your pod looks pretty banged up. You want me to take a look? I might be able to fix it. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head furiously. The translator barely kept up as she spat rapid words. No, stay away. Humans. They destroy. Take. Eat. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. Eat. Really? What kind of bedtime stories are they telling you guys about humans? Vea didn't answer, but her tiny hands trembled. Marcus softened his tone. Listen, Vea, I know I look scary to you, but I'm not here to hurt you. If I wanted to, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you, right? She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the food wrapper still clutched in her hand. The logic seemed to calm her slightly, though she still kept the shard close. Marcus pointed to the pod. Your pod's not going anywhere in this condition. If we don't fix it, you're stuck here. And trust me, this planet isn't exactly a vacation spot. Vea's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced at the pod, then at Marcus. Slowly, she gave a reluctant nod. Taking her permission as a green light, Marcus approached the pod carefully, his hands visible the entire time. He crouched beside the damaged hatch, examining the fried circuits and bent panels. This isn't too bad, he said, half to himself. Might take a while, but it's fixable. Vea stayed huddled inside, watching his every move like a hawk. Marcus pulled out a small toolkit from his backpack and began tinkering with the controls. He worked in silence, aware that any sudden noise might spook her. After a while, he glanced over his shoulder. You know, if you're going to keep staring at me like that, you might as well help. Vea blinked, confused. The translator repeated his words, and she frowned. Help. Yeah. Come here. Hold this, Marcus said, holding out a small metal piece. Vea hesitated, her tiny hands gripping the shard tightly. Slowly, she set it down and crawled toward him. Her movements cautious. She took the metal piece, her fingers brushing against his. Marcus noticed how cold her skin was, like touching frost. Good, Marcus said with a smile. Now hold it steady while I tighten this. Vea did as instructed, her violet eyes narrowing in concentration. For the first time, Marcus saw a hint of confidence in her expression. She handed him tools when he asked, her hands trembling less with each passing minute. As the hours wore on, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. The pod systems flickered to life under Marcus's careful repairs. He sat back, wiping grease from his hands. There, that should do it for now. It's not perfect, but it'll get you out of here. Vea stared at the glowing controls, her mouth slightly open in awe. She looked up at Marcus, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she mumbled a quiet, "Thank you." Marcus grinned. "See, told you I'm not so bad." Vea didn't smile back, but her tense shoulders relaxed just a little. For the first time since their encounter, Marcus felt like they were on the same side. The silence between them was no longer filled with fear. It held the first flickers of trust. The small interior of Marcus's ship hummed with a quiet rhythm as it hovered just above the barren planet's surface. Vea sat curled up in a corner of the cabin, her wide violet eyes fixed on Marcus as he worked on repairing a damaged communication device. The tools in his hands clinked softly, filling the silence between them. She still didn't trust him completely, but something about his calm demeanor and steady hands had begun to ease her fears. Marcus glanced at her every now and then, careful not to make her feel trapped. "You're staring again," he said without looking up. His tone was light, teasing. "Do I have something on my face, Or are you just trying to figure out if I'm really as scary as you thought? The translator repeated his words in her language, and Vea's lips twitched, almost like she wanted to smile but wasn't sure if it was allowed. She hugged her knees tighter, her tiny frame looking even smaller in the ship's cold, metallic interior. "You can talk, you know," Marcus said. "This isn't a one-way conversation." Vea hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why? Why do you help me?" Marcus paused, setting down his tools. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Because you needed help. Isn't that reason enough?" Her violet eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to detect any hidden motive. "Humans. They take, hurt, eat." He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, you've mentioned that. Look, I don't know what kind of stories you've heard, but we're not all like that. I'm just a guy trying to survive out here, same as you." Vea looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her tattered sleeve. "My people, they say humans are monsters." "Monsters," Marcus repeated with a dry chuckle. "Well, that's flattering. But if I were a monster, do you think I'd be fixing your pod and sharing my food?" She didn't respond, but her gaze softened slightly. Marcus decided to change the subject, sensing she needed time to process her thoughts. "Here," he said, tossing a small device toward her. She flinched but caught it instinctively. It was a handheld screen, showing a simple puzzle game. "Keeps your hands busy and your mind distracted. Try it." Vea stared at the device, her curiosity slowly overtaking her caution. She tapped the screen hesitantly, and the game sprang to life. Her face lit up with surprise, and for the first time, Marcus saw a genuine spark of wonder in her expression. "See, not so bad," he said, grinning. As she became engrossed in the game, Marcus went back to his repairs. Time passed in companionable silence, interrupted only by the occasional beep of the game or the hiss of his tools. When Marcus finally finished, he leaned back and stretched, letting out a satisfied sigh. "All right," he announced. "The comms are good to go. If we're lucky, we'll pick up a signal from your people." Vea looked up from the game, her expression suddenly clouded with worry. "My people, they will not trust you." Marcus shrugged. "They don't have to. I'm not doing this for their approval. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." Her gaze lingered on him, filled with a mix of doubt and something else, respect, perhaps. It was hard to tell. She set the game down and stood, her tiny figure barely reaching his waist as she approached. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You are not like the stories." Marcus smiled. "Thanks, I think. But don't go rewriting your myths just yet. I'm only human." She tilted her head, as if pondering his words. Then, with a tentative step, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. For Marcus, it wasn't just a sign of trust. It was the beginning of an unlikely friendship. The stars twinkled outside the ship's windows as Marcus navigated through the cold, dark void of space. The engine hummed steadily beneath his feet, and for a brief moment, everything felt calm. Vea sat quietly beside him, still not entirely at ease, but no longer as frightened as she had been when they first met. Marcus adjusted the ship's course toward the coordinates Vea had given him. She sat silently, her eyes on the stars outside, lost in her own thoughts. After a few minutes, she spoke, her voice soft, but filled with urgency. "Human," she said, her accent still thick but more confident now. "You need to hurry." Marcus turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" Vea's eyes were wide with worry. "My people, they are in danger. The enemy will arrive soon. If we don't get there in time, they will. They will take everything." Marcus frowned, the seriousness of her tone catching him off guard. "What kind of danger?" "The invaders," Vea replied, her voice trembling. "They come from a nearby system. They want our resources, our technology. They will not leave until they have everything." Marcus understood. He had dealt with his own share of hostile forces, but this sounded different. A race for survival. He glanced at Vea, noticing how her tiny frame seemed even smaller now as she hunched over in worry. She had already been through so much, and now her people were facing even greater peril. "We'll get there in time," Marcus said, trying to reassure her. "But we need a plan. You said your people don't trust me, right?" Vea nodded, her face filled with guilt. "They will not believe you are here to help." Marcus thought for a moment. "Then I'll show them. Actions speak louder than words." Vea looked up at him, her eyes still filled with doubt. "And if they do not listen?" "We make them listen," Marcus said firmly. He turned back to the controls and adjusted the ship's speed. He had faced impossible odds before, but he wasn't going to let this small alien girl down, not after everything she'd been through. The ship's engines roared as it surged forward, slicing through the vastness of space. The silence between them was filled with tension. Marcus knew they were running out of time, but he also knew that if he could just reach her planet, he could help. He had to. For hours, they flew through space, Vea occasionally glancing at Marcus, still unsure whether or not she could trust him fully. But with each passing minute, it became clear that there was a bond forming between them, one built not just on necessity, but on a mutual respect that neither of them had expected. Finally, the planet appeared on the horizon, a blue and green world teeming with life. But it wasn't the peaceful planet it had once been. Marcus could see the signs of conflict from orbit, smoke rising from the surface, explosions lighting up the atmosphere in bright flashes. Vea's face drained of color. "They are already here." Marcus didn't hesitate. He punched in the coordinates for a safe landing zone and piloted the ship toward the surface. The ship shook as it broke through the planet's atmosphere, the outer layers of air heating up around them. Vea clutched the seat, her knuckles turning white, but Marcus stayed calm. He had flown in worse conditions. They landed roughly, the ship jolting as it hit the ground. Marcus quickly powered down the engines, unstrapping himself from the seat and turning to Vea. "We're here," he said. "Now we need to act fast." Vea scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with fear. "My people, they will fight back, but they are too small, too weak. We need you." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her. "I got your back. Let's do this together." They made their way out of the ship, stepping into the hot, smoky air of the planet's surface. In the distance, they could see the wreckage of destroyed buildings and the movements of the enemy forces. Vea's people, tiny and delicate, were already making their stand. But without the proper resources or weapons, it was clear they didn't stand a chance. Vea turned to Marcus, her eyes pleading. "Please, you must help us. We cannot lose everything." Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed his blaster from his side and nodded. "Let's show them why humans aren't to be underestimated." With that, they rushed into the fray, ready to fight for Vea's home, her people, and a chance to prove that even the smallest allies could make the biggest difference. The sun was beginning to set as Marcus and Vea made their way through the chaotic streets of her planet's capital. The smell of smoke and burning metal filled the air, and the distant sound of weapons firing echoed through the crumbling buildings. Vea clutched Marcus's sleeve as they ran, her small feet struggling to keep up with his long strides. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice calm, though he could feel the tension building. Vea didn't answer right away. She was scanning the surroundings, her eyes darting from one street corner to another. She had become more focused, more determined. Marcus had never seen her like this, small and fragile, yes, but now there was a fire in her that he hadn't noticed before. She was no longer the frightened girl he had met on the alien pod, but someone with a purpose. "Follow me," she finally said, her voice low and steady. "I know a way to get to the council building. It's the last place we can regroup. My people are already there." Marcus nodded, knowing they couldn't waste any more time. The enemy forces were everywhere, and every second counted. He had already spotted several groups of armed invaders patrolling the streets, but he knew his ship's weapons, and their training could give them an advantage if they reached the council in time. As they moved through the debris-filled streets, Marcus kept his eyes on the rooftops and alleyways, always aware of their surroundings. He had been in enough battle situations to know that the worst attacks came when you least expected them. Vea, however, seemed to have a sixth sense for danger. She moved with a kind of quiet grace, pausing only when necessary to avoid detection. They reached an alleyway that led to the main street near the council building. Marcus signaled for Vea to stop, crouching low against the wall. His instincts told him something wasn't right. He could hear the faint sound of boots marching in the distance. Enemy soldiers. "Stay low," he whispered to Vea, taking her hand and pulling her into the shadows. "We need to move quickly." Vea nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. They crouched in the dark, barely breathing as the enemy soldiers passed by. The sound of their footsteps grew louder, and Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He could see them now, heavily armed, scanning every corner as they moved. One of the soldiers turned down the alleyway, and for a brief moment, his eyes met Marcus's. The soldier's eyes widened in shock, but before he could react, Marcus raised his blaster and fired a quick, precise shot. The soldier collapsed without a sound. Vea's breath caught in her throat, and Marcus quickly pulled her farther into the shadows. "We don't have time to fight them all," he muttered. "We keep moving." They pressed on, weaving through alleyways and deserted buildings until they finally reached the council building. It was a large structure, once a symbol of the planet's power and unity, but now a target for the invaders. The massive front doors were blown open, and smoke billowed from inside. Vea hesitated at the entrance. "This is it," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "This is where the leaders are. We have to make them believe we can fight back." Marcus nodded. "We'll convince them. But first, we need to hold the line." Inside the building, the sound of distant fighting echoed off the stone walls. Vea led him down a narrow corridor, stopping in front of a large, reinforced door. She pressed a button, and the door slid open with a low hum. The room beyond was dark, but the glowing screens on the walls flickered to life as they entered. A group of Vea's people, small and fragile, were gathered around a large table, clearly planning their next move. The moment they saw Marcus, their eyes widened in surprise and fear. They had never seen a human before, let alone one in the middle of their planet's fight for survival. "Vea, who is this?" one of the leaders asked, his voice thick with suspicion. "This is Marcus," Vea said, stepping forward. "He's here to help us." The room fell silent. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, their doubt heavy in the air. He could understand their reluctance to trust him, but he wasn't here to prove himself. He was here to save them. "We don't have much time," Marcus said, his voice steady and calm. "We've got the tools to fight back. You've got the courage. Let's make this planet yours again." Vea's people exchanged hesitant glances, but something in Marcus's words, his tone, made them pause. Slowly, one by one, they stood. Their fear had not disappeared, but a spark of hope flickered in their eyes. "Let's show them what we're made of," Vea said, her voice filled with determination. Marcus smiled, knowing they were finally ready to fight together. The dimly lit room hummed with the sound of quiet conversations, the air heavy with anticipation. Marcus stood at the center, his blaster holstered but within easy reach, surrounded by the leaders and survivors of Vea's people. His hands were steady, but his mind raced. They had just entered the council building, and the atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. Vea had led him here, but now it was his turn to prove himself. The room was a strange blend of alien technology and ancient architecture. Glowing screens lined the walls, showing faint images of their homeworld, while intricate carvings in the stone floors told the stories of Vea's people. In the far corner, a few of Vea's people nervously whispered among themselves. Their small frames, standing just above Marcus's waist, moved with a quiet grace, but their eyes held fear and doubt. They had never seen a human before, and now they had one standing in front of them, promising to help them fight back against the invaders. "Vea," one of the leaders said, his voice calm but firm. He was an older male, his face marked with the lines of age and experience. "Who is this human? What is his purpose here?" Vea stood tall beside Marcus, her small form almost hidden by his presence, but her voice was strong as she replied. "This is Marcus. He helped me when I was alone. He can help us now. He is not our enemy." The leader eyed Marcus carefully, his expression unreadable. "You expect us to trust a human, someone who has never walked on our planet before." Marcus felt the weight of the eyes on him, the doubt, the fear. He had known this moment would come. He had known that Vea's people wouldn't simply accept him because he was here to help. Trust had to be earned. "I understand your hesitation," Marcus said, his voice steady. "You've never seen humans before, and the stories you've heard, I can't change those overnight. But I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here because I believe in what you're fighting for." There was a long silence as the leaders exchanged looks. Finally, another leader, a woman with sharp features and an air of authority, spoke up. "You speak of fighting, but we are not warriors. Our people are small, vulnerable. What makes you think you can help us?" Marcus took a deep breath. He had heard stories about Vea's people, their strength not in their physical power, but in their intelligence and their ability to survive. They were survivors, each one capable of great things. They just needed to believe in themselves. "Because we can work together," Marcus replied. "I don't expect you to become soldiers overnight, but I've seen what you can do. You can outsmart any enemy if you put your minds to it, and I can show you how to fight back." Vea's people listened, some still unsure, others starting to nod in agreement. Marcus wasn't just talking about weapons and tactics. He was talking about hope. He was talking about unity. "I know this isn't easy to accept," Marcus continued, "but we don't have time to waste. The invaders are already here, and they're stronger, but you have something they don't, each other. Together, we stand a chance." Vea stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "I believe in him. I've seen how he fights. He doesn't want to hurt us. He wants to help us." The leader who had spoken first looked at Vea, then back at Marcus. "We are not warriors. We have no experience with combat." "Then we'll start there," Marcus said, his voice full of determination. "I've trained soldiers, and I know how to turn fear into action. But first, you need to trust me. Trust Vea. We can do this together." For a moment, no one moved. The tension in the room was thick. Vea's people were small, their arms slender and delicate. They didn't have the power of an army, nor the weapons to defend themselves. But they had something far stronger: intelligence, unity, and the will to survive. Slowly, one of the leaders stepped forward. "We'll need weapons," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I can help with that," Marcus replied. "I've got the supplies and the knowledge. But we'll need to work together, like a team. It's the only way we'll succeed." The room seemed to hold its breath as the leaders and survivors considered his words. Finally, the first leader nodded. "Very well. We will trust you for now. But you must prove that your methods work. We will fight together." Marcus nodded in return, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose. He had known this wasn't going to be easy, but this was the first step. The first step toward turning Vea's people into the allies they needed to be. "Thank you," Marcus said. "Now, let's show them what we're made of." The night was quiet, but the tension in the air was thick. Marcus stood at the window of the council building, looking out at the chaotic battlefield. The once beautiful city now lay in ruins, with fires burning in the distance, and the sounds of weapons echoing through the streets. Vea's people had made their stand, but they were still outnumbered and outgunned. The invaders were relentless, and every moment they hesitated meant more destruction. Vea walked up beside Marcus, her small form barely making a sound. She was no longer the terrified girl who had first met him on the barren planet. She had grown stronger, more confident in her actions. The fire in her eyes was unmistakable. "Marcus," she said, her voice filled with determination, "we can't wait any longer. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything." Marcus turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I know. We're running out of time. But rushing in without a plan is a good way to get all of us killed." Vea nodded, understanding his point. She had learned quickly from Marcus that preparation and strategy were just as important as the weapons they held. They couldn't afford to make mistakes now. The leaders of Vea's people had gathered in the council room, looking over maps and blueprints of the city. They were planning their final strike, trying to figure out where the enemy forces were concentrated and where they could make the most impact. Marcus had helped them set up makeshift defenses, using his knowledge of tactics and technology to turn their small but clever group into a fighting force. Still, they were no match for the invaders' advanced weaponry. They needed an edge, something that would turn the tide in their favor. "Where do we hit them first?" Marcus asked, pacing around the room. One of the leaders, an older female with sharp features, stood up and pointed to a section of the map. "This is where they're holding most of their troops," she said. "If we can disrupt their supply lines here, we might be able to force them to retreat." Marcus studied the map carefully. "That's a good target, but we'll need a distraction. Something big, something that will make them shift their focus." Vea stepped forward. "We can do that," she said confidently. "I'll lead a small group to sabotage their power grid. If we take out their main source of energy, it'll cripple their weapons and their communication." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's risky. Are you sure you can do it?" Vea met his gaze without hesitation. "I've been trained to do this since I was a child. I know the grid better than anyone." Marcus could see the fire in her eyes. He knew she wasn't going to back down. She had come a long way from the scared girl she once was, and now she was ready to fight for her people. "All right," Marcus said, nodding. "We'll give you the backup you need, but you'll need to be fast. We won't have much time before the invaders realize we've hit them." With a final look at the map, Marcus turned to the rest of the group. "The rest of us will create a diversion here," he said, pointing to another part of the city. "We'll draw their attention. Keep them occupied while Vea and her team hit their power grid. Once they're down, we go in." The leaders exchanged glances, weighing the risks. It was a bold plan, but it was the only one that had a chance of success. "We'll do it," the older leader said firmly. "For our home." With the plan in place, the group sprang into action. Marcus led a small squad to the outskirts of the city, where they would set up explosives to cause a massive distraction. The sound of their footsteps was muffled by the thick dust that hung in the air. They moved quickly, knowing the invaders could strike at any moment. Vea, with a handful of her people, moved stealthily through the city toward the power grid. They stayed in the shadows, careful not to attract attention. Vea had mapped out the entire facility, and she knew exactly where to plant the explosives. The tension was unbearable as they worked silently. Marcus's squad triggered the first round of explosions, sending the invaders into a panic. The enemy's focus shifted, just as Marcus had planned. He could hear the distant sounds of gunfire and shouting as the diversion took hold. Vea and her team rushed to the power grid. They worked quickly, planting charges on the main energy cores. Just as they were about to finish, an enemy patrol rounded the corner. Vea's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. She grabbed a weapon from one of her team members and fired, taking down the patrol before they could alert the others. "Move," she yelled, as they detonated the charges. The power grid exploded in a massive burst of light, and the city was plunged into darkness. The invaders were caught off guard, their weapons and communication systems failing. The battle raged on, the city now cloaked in darkness. The explosions had done their job, disrupting the enemy's power, sending them into disarray. Marcus could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins as he fought alongside Vea's people, each of them working together in ways he hadn't thought possible. The invaders, though technologically superior, were unprepared for the unity and resourcefulness of Vea's small, seemingly fragile people. While they weren't physically strong, they were quick, clever, and determined to protect their home. They used their knowledge of the city's underground tunnels and hidden passages to stay one step ahead of the enemy, striking when least expected. Marcus moved with the precision and efficiency of someone who had seen too many battles. His training had prepared him for moments like this, but what made this fight different was Vea. She was no longer just the terrified girl from the alien pod. She was a leader now, coordinating her people and directing them with confidence. She had proven herself time and again, not just to Marcus, but to everyone around her. "Marcus, over here," Vea called from across the street, her voice cutting through the chaos. He turned just in time to see her and a small team of survivors moving toward him, dodging enemy fire with ease. Marcus rushed to meet them, his pulse quickening. Vea was leading the charge, her small frame moving with surprising speed as she ducked behind a damaged vehicle. "The invaders are retreating," Vea said, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and disbelief. "We've done it. They're pulling back." Marcus looked around, trying to get a clearer picture of the situation. The invaders, who had once seemed unstoppable, were now scattered and disorganized. Their forces were breaking apart, their command structure falling apart in the wake of the sabotage. "We still need to finish this," Marcus said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We can't let them regroup." Vea nodded, her face set with determination. "We won't. We've shown them that we're not weak, that we're not afraid." Marcus smiled at her, impressed by how far she had come. She had taken the fear that had once held her back and turned it into strength. Now she was leading her people into battle, fighting for their survival and their future. They moved through the streets, each step bringing them closer to the invaders' command center. It wasn't just about victory anymore. It was about proving that humanity, both the humans and Vea's people, could stand together, face down their enemies, and fight for something bigger than themselves. As they approached the command center, Marcus gave the signal to halt. He knew they couldn't rush in recklessly. They needed a plan. "Vea, you and your team go in through the side entrance," Marcus said. "We'll create a diversion in the front. Once we've got their attention, you move in and take out their leadership." Vea looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "And then we finish this." "Exactly." With a final nod, Vea led her group to the side, moving swiftly and silently as they closed in on the enemy's command post. Marcus's team positioned themselves around the front, taking cover behind broken walls and wrecked vehicles. The sounds of battle were still loud, but the invaders were beginning to lose their confidence. The power had been cut off, their communications were down, and they were caught in a defensive position. "Now," Marcus shouted. The team fired a series of shots into the air, creating an explosive distraction. The invaders turned, confused, just as Vea and her team made their move. They infiltrated the command center with ease, quickly taking control of the situation. Marcus could only watch from his position as the rest of the team fought to keep the enemy distracted. It wasn't long before the invaders' leadership had been taken down. Their command structure was in chaos, and without direction, they began to retreat. The victory was almost in their grasp. As the dust settled, Marcus and Vea's team regrouped in the heart of the city, surrounded by the remnants of the invaders' forces. There was still work to be done, but for the first time, the victory felt real. Vea looked at Marcus, her face breaking into a smile. "We did it. We really did it." Marcus smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. "No, we did it. Together." The once feared invaders were now on the run, their forces scattered and leaderless. The people of Vea's planet had proven that even the smallest, most underestimated force could stand up and fight for what they believed in. As they stood amidst the ruins of the battle, Marcus realized that the fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building something new, something stronger. And together, humanity and Vea's people had done just that. The war wasn't over yet, but the victory they had earned would be remembered for generations. The dust had settled, and the silence that followed was almost eerie. The once bustling city was now a war-torn landscape, but there was no mistaking the sense of victory that hung in the air. The invaders had retreated, their forces scattered, and their command in ruins. Vea's people had proven themselves, and Marcus had helped them do what seemed impossible. As the survivors gathered in the central square, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. It was one thing to fight for survival, but it was another thing entirely to fight alongside people who had once been so afraid, so vulnerable. Vea's people had changed in ways that Marcus hadn't expected. They had gone from hiding in fear to standing tall as warriors. And through it all, Vea had been their leader. She stood a few steps away, talking to the leaders of her people. Her voice was calm and strong, her presence commanding. She had come a long way from the frightened girl Marcus had first met. She had become a symbol of hope for her people, someone who had not only survived, but had led them to victory. Marcus watched her for a moment, taking in the way she spoke to her people with such confidence. It wasn't just her intelligence or her bravery that made her a leader. It was her heart. She cared about her people, and that was something Marcus had seen firsthand. She had never backed down, even when the odds seemed impossible. As the leaders gathered to discuss the next steps, Vea turned and noticed Marcus standing off to the side. She excused herself from the group and walked toward him, her steps quick and purposeful. "We did it," she said with a smile that lit up her face. Marcus returned her smile, though there was a tiredness in his eyes. "Yeah, we did. I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her voice sincere. Marcus shook his head. "It wasn't just me. It was you. You led them. You gave them hope when they needed it most." Vea looked down at the ground, her expression softening. "I never thought I could be a leader. I was always afraid. But you showed me that I could be more. I could be strong, and my people could be strong too." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support. "You were always strong, Vea. You just needed to believe it." She smiled up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I think I'm starting to believe it." The moment between them was quiet, but it felt significant. They had been through so much together, and now, standing in the aftermath of the battle, it felt like they had formed a bond that couldn't be broken. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the city, Marcus and Vea stood side by side, looking out over the ruins of the battle. It was hard to see the city in its current state, but Marcus knew that it would rebuild. The people here had proven that they could rise above the destruction, that they could come together and create something stronger than before. "You know, I never thought I'd be part of something like this," Marcus said after a long pause. "I've been to a lot of places, fought a lot of battles. But this was different." Vea nodded, her eyes never leaving the horizon. "Yeah, it feels different. We've shown that even the smallest among us can make a difference. We fought for our home, for our future." Marcus smiled softly. "You didn't just fight for your future. You fought for all of us. We're in this together now." Vea turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "You've been a true ally, Marcus. More than that. I think I consider you a friend." The word hung in the air for a moment. Marcus was used to fighting alongside people, but true friendship wasn't something he had expected to find in a war. Yet here it was, between him and a small alien girl who had once feared he would devour her. "I'm glad I can call you a friend too," Marcus replied, his voice sincere. The two of them stood there in silence, watching the last light of day fade away. The battle was over, but their journey together had only just begun. They had proven that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope. And that hope could bring together even the most unlikely of allies. As the first stars began to appear in the night sky, Marcus knew that whatever came next, they would face it together.